I noticed in the news today that Russel Brand, the famous celebrity and expat to America, has finally been charged with one charge of rape. And he's got some other lesser charges also to defend, about 5 of them I think, lesser charges. And he's going to be coming back to England to defend himself.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for these incredible and overwhelming messages of support.
We're very fortunate in a way to live in a time where there's so little trust in the British government. We're very fortunate, I suppose, that this is happening at a time where we know that the law has become a kind of weapon to be used against people, institutions, and sometimes entire nations that will not accept and tolerate levels of corruption that are unprecedented. I'm speaking particularly to those of you that are watching from the UK. How do you feel about your legal system right now? How do you feel about some of the high-profile cases that are not being pursued and prosecuted? How do you feel that the Southport murders were handled? How do you feel about the government of Keir Starmer? Now, that's just sort of general context.
Me, I've always told you guys that when I was young and single, before I had my wife and
family, were just about shot over there, my beautiful children. I was a fool, man. I was a fool before I lived in the light of the Lord.
I was a drug addict, a sex addict, and an imbecile. But what I never was a rapist. I've never engaged in non-consensual activity. I pray that you can see that by looking in my eyes. I want to thank all of you for your continuing
support. I want to let you know that our show will be on Rumble on Monday. Thanks for your support there.
And of course, I'm now going to have the opportunity to defend these charges in court, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. In the meantime, you lot, stay free, and we will be continuing to discuss this matter.
Praise the Lord.
Now, I can't really comment on this. I don't know what's happened. Obviously going to be something that can only really be debated in court. I can't really have an opinion on who's right and who's wrong at this point in time. I think anybody who has an opinion on who's right and who's wrong in this, at this particular time, is probably just whether you like Russel Brand or whether you like the person who's accusing him. The historical precedent of Russel Brand's famously numerous sexual encounters suggests that statistically the probability is that he's more likely to be well, not innocent, I suppose. It's a very difficult legal terminology, the term innocent, you know, it's all about the technicalities. But when he says that he believes that all of his encounters are always consensual, and yet this rape allegation seems to be a borderline one where both parties were really intoxicated, and it seems like the other party knew who he was and what his reputation was and all that kind of thing. But of course technicalities are technicalities, and what it brought to my mind was an idea that I've had for, you know, a couple of years now. And it's quite a far out idea, you know, like most new ideas are, you know. Would it work? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't given it a lot of thought to the point where I'm so enamoured with the idea that I'm going to dedicate my life to bringing it into force. But it's an idea that I think possibly could benefit society, particularly in cases like this, where you've got somebody who's a bit of a slag, high number count, you know, on their sexual activity historical record, and you've got somebody who's in their company in a state of social excitement, as it were, and for whatever reasons sexual activity has occurred. My idea is to have a sort of like a consent app. The two people would have the app on their phone, and when they first meet, in whatever circumstances, and whenever both parties feel it's the right time, they can send a consent agreement between the two on the app. It's not a consent to sex necessarily. You can have different grades of consent, like person A thinks person B is good looking, so they can send them a request, you know, I think you're a bit fit, fancy a snog sometime. And so their consent agreement is limited to snogging at this point in time. And the other person, they can read it and go, yeah, I don't know, might be into a snog. On the other hand, no, I'm not really into it. And they can reply on their app, what their response is. But the thing about this app, possibly what makes it unworkable, I don't know, is that it'd all be fully public. Anybody who has the app can look up anybody and see what their sexual history, and not just sexual history, but relationship, friendliness, and blah, blah, blah. Whatever you categorise, it's difficult to categorise what is sex nowadays because, as I say, Russel Brand's got these 5 other lesser charges that are related to sex, but you can get done for groping and I don't know. I haven't had sex with anyone for 15 years. I've lost track of what is and isn't legal anymore, it no longer concerns me. But anyway, you know what I mean, it's like broadening definitions and all that. And anyway, because it's all public, it's sort of like a trust pilot for sexual activity and relationship activity and what have you. When you spot somebody, and they're on the app, you can just look at their history. So before you even say your first post, hey, fancy a snog sometime, you can have a look through their history and find out, whether they're, from other experiences, whether they're like the kind of person that you want to necessarily have a snog. So if you're like looking through and it's like, they haven't had much activity, you might feel your odds are higher. But if you look through and they've had like thousands of activities, like with Russel Brand or whatever, you can think like, oh, he's a bit of a slag, I might catch something, whatever, and that might like put you on the starter. And Russel Brand, he wouldn't have been tempted to, even go for the first snog with this other person because there's been no initial agreement in the first place. And with an app like that, you could do it while off your face, it's very simple, and it's the kind of thing you can put into your sort of like automated routines, so that even when you're like, it's something you can figure out. So that, then when rape cases come up, having no agreements on the app is a good indicator that somebody wasn't in agreement. But the best thing about it, I think, is that you could have reviews, like you do for everything else in the world, products, movies, books, whatever. After people have engaged in any kind of sexual activity, be it anything from a fondle or a snog all the way up to, I don't know, let your imagination run wild, really. They can, put a review, like we had a bit of a slap and tickle behind the hedge after a night at the pub, and I found it to be a very pleasurable experience. Or I was, 5 stars, or 4 stars, shame about halitosis, something like that, And conversely, somebody's had a negative experience, they could put, it's like, oh, it was horrible, really. He didn't really know what to grab. He was, it was too off his face to do anything. After I smelled the halitosis, I decided that wasn't going to be, it's not going to happen, really. I ain't snugging him. He took that badly, and he started like pulling at me, and I had to like scream in his face to get rid of him, And 1 star, there's all up there for everybody to see, So, next time they're down the horse and feathers, and people look, there's somebody up there who thinks he's a bit hot, his face might have a chance here, oh dear, oh no, you go up to the bar, smell the breath, halitosis still there, that's a pretty accurate review. And so in the case of sort of like Russel Brand, you can have these thousands of reviews, and he's like 99% happy because like we've had open season on Russel Brand for over a year now, whatever it is. And everybody who's had a negative experience has been allowed to phone the cops and tell them all about it. And he's had thousands of customers, as it were, and there's a very small number of people that have complained. I noticed in the reports, they're still asking people to come forward. It's sort of like, because I think they know that like he's got 1,000 happy customers and just a couple of unhappy customers, which, although, you know, technically it doesn't matter in a legal case, for the wider public, and particularly the circumstances of the one instance that's, you know, been a rape, accused rape or whatever, it's when they're both intoxicated. So that it's not a really easy sell to the public that, you know, this guy's a rapist, you know, let's all call him a rapist, you know, if he gets done for it, you know, it's a bit, you know, it's a bit difficult really. So they're begging people to come forward so that they can be more serious about how serious it possibly could be. But if we had this app with all the reviews and the initial connections and the toing and froing of what kind of things people are getting up to, fancy a snog? Yeah, I fancy a snog. They meet. Oh no, negative review. We agreed to a snog and he tried to stick his dick in me, you know. I'm not having that. Shouted at him. Ended there. 1-star review. And then if that bloke goes to court, you know, because he's dragged somebody behind a hedge and got violent, you know, there's that historical record there. That helps, doesn't it, you know? So you say, well, people won't use it because they don't want that historical record. Well, that's the thing. It's like most things. It's like, well, what are you trying to hide then? You know, again, you go on there and you stick it and somebody's got no reviews at all because they're paranoid. You think, why are you paranoid? You know, a bit soft. Maybe I won't ask them for a snog, you know. And so, you know, this can start from a very young age. Obviously, youth is, you know, a highly controversial topic, especially on social media. So again, that's another thing how, I don't know how it works, but where do you make the cut-off point where you like the child version and the adult version? And you can get an idea of what somebody's like before you even engage in any of these processes. It would work, I think, in that it would add a sort of element of peer pressure to the whole nature of having sex, which is what religion is all about. You know, religion is all about engaging in any form of sexual activity as some kind is a hideous sin to like the extremist religions, you know, and you should only ever do it when you're trying to pump out a baby, you know. It's like, fine, yeah, that's in its extremity, but it doesn't always work, does it? I mean, let's face it. And even people who live that lifestyle, they could still be on the app and you could have lovers, you know, spending their whole life just sending each other nice messages and reinforcing how much they love each other, you know. Other people who live that, oh, they are in a happy marriage, aren't they? Oh, that does work. So even from that point of view, you know, you could use it as a promotion for extremist religion as well. I mean, it's no barrier to its potential, you know. You know, showing people that people do actually stick around together if they, you know, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so, yeah, with this sort of like age thing, when it should start and when it should finish, but, you know, it would help young people know that there's some kind of, not rules, but social conventions around sex. For a young person, it probably wouldn't even be sex. It would very much be just the snogging, you know, and you show me yours, I'll show you mine, and all that nonsense, you know. You know, we're trying to be an open society now, so parents could look in on it and, oh, who's my kid snogging today, you know, and keeping a check on them. But then kids won't use it if their parents are looking at it. But that's the whole thing, isn't it? You know, once something's sort of like normalised and part of society, then that adds to the peer pressure to make sure that people are going about their business as society would prefer them to go about their business. The problem of putting everything in the open, I mean, there was loads of flaws to this system, obviously. I mean, you know, trolls and blah, 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 blah. But from a trying to solve a problem point of view, I think that's kind of what society needs, really. Because when a complete slag meets an immovable object, boom, you know, it's like so many people grow up and get to adulthood, and we're having problems at the moment with people not knowing, you know, how people should relate to each other, you know, without venturing into extremities. The sort of gradual evolution of learning from a young age to use an app that stabilises the concept of consent, I think would, you know, I think that would be a good idea. It might be ludicrous. You know, I haven't thought of the negatives because I think it's a good idea. But there is obviously possibly lots of negatives that might make it not work. Anyway, best of luck to Russel Brand, or / if you're on the other side, best of luck to the lady, whoever's in the riot. We shall wait and see, I suppose.